Happy Tuesday morning, everybody. Again, welcome. My name is Kevin Burns. I'm the mayor of Geneva, Illinois, and you are joining us for the Tuesday, February 17th Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus Environment and Energy Committee. Today, we're talking about CRGA. And if on the off chance you've been under a rock for a while, you're not sure what CRGA is, it is the new legislation passed by friends in Springfield regarding the reliability of the grid. In fact, the Clean and Reliable Grid Act was signed into law in January of this year. Today, we're going to hear about its impacts on local governments and areas of opportunity, including battery storage. Our friend Mark Pruitt is the caucus's energy consultant and principal of the Power Bureau. Prior to founding the Power Bureau, Mark spent several years as director of the Illinois Power Agency. He also teaches, ready for this, master's students at Northwestern University in the Energy and Sustainability program. Anyone interested in taking Mark's class, he will pay the tuition for you, which is a heck of a benefit. Some of you on the call may also remember Mark from the Energy Academy, one of our most popular and often referred to experiences with Mark. He taught this course a few years ago, and how he helps to manage the caucus's community solar program. So here we go, folks. Mark Pruitt, principal of the Power Bureau and adjunct associate professor at Northwestern University, Master of Science in Energy and Sustainability program. He's going to provide us with an energy outlook at the state and federal level, CRGA Act, battery storage, solar, and more. Mark, good morning, and thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. Let me just see if I can get everything displayed correctly. If someone can give me an audible on that. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. And your check is in the mail. So well done. Well done. As was mentioned, we're going to be talking about the recently passed and signed Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act. I have been informed by some parties that it is referred to as CRGA. Others have called it CRGA. I don't know which is correct, but I'll go with CRGA. And if I'm wrong, we'll go back and touch that up. But when we do these types of events with the Mayor's Caucus, we always cover a lot of territory because I'm a big believer in context. And so the agenda is just a little bit of an overview, then some background. This is the context part to talk about what else is going on in the market around CRGA. And then we'll dive into the particulars of CRGA and then some options for municipalities. And then we'll be open for discussion at the end. I believe that we can field questions. Is the direction to pop questions into the comments section, and then we'll curate those for the end. Is that how we're going to manage those today?
I think that's our preference, unless you think otherwise, Mark. We love the fluidity of your presentations are so valuable. We hate for it to be intercepted or interrupted as we go. But I will also defer to Cheryl and Tori and Juliet. I suspect there might be a question that's so important that we might respectfully ask for a brief pause.
Absolutely. So I'm here to deliver the information in the best way possible. So
that's great.
If something is just a burning issue, go ahead and fire it out, and we'll address it. If it's something super detailed, we might kick it towards the end, but we will get to it. So that's the agenda. So a lot to get through. You got the introduction for me in the Power Bureau. We do energy policy planning and procurement. We both do retail and wholesale energy. And when I say we, that's kind of the royal we. There's just me. The objectives for today are just to provide clarifications and context about what was in the bill, and then to try to drill down to figure out what, if anything, local municipalities need to be doing. I personally think that this is a rich environment for municipal leadership. But I leave that to you and your organization to decide if this is the type of thing you want to take on. So in terms of background, Illinois has had in the past 10 years three major pieces of energy legislation, and I tried to color code them in verticals, right? So starting with the Future Energy Jobs Act, which was a measly 503 pages back in 2016. That was during the Rounder administration. Then the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, also called CRGA, kind of beefed up to a healthy 956 pages in length and was executed in 2021, or enacted rather. And then the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act comes in over the 1,000-page mark, was just signed into law by the governor in 2026. I think it's important to understand that legislation, particularly energy legislation, builds upon itself. So there are elements of FEJA in 2016 that have been amended and updated and expanded by CRGA and now CRGA. And that's what this table really seeks to do, is just identify the elements down on the vertical axis, the primary goal, renewable and clean energy targets, nuclear power, grid management, energy storage, equity and workforce. And of course, there's a lot of detail that we're just not including here, right? I mean, in several hundreds of pages, there's always going to be specialized information. But I just wanted to provide this table for you for reference that things are changing. I'll just grab a couple of examples here for you. So just look at the renewable/clean targets, the second element down. So in FEJA maintained the 25% RPS goal by 2025 that was set in the 2007 IPA Act, but that's where all the carve-outs occurred, was under FEJA. So the Adjustable Block Program, the Solar for All program, the Brownfields carve-out, the community solar, all that came about in FEJA. A few years later, in CRGA, those RPS targets were increased. So instead of 25% by 2025, Illinois now seeks 40% by 2030 and 50% renewables by 2040. And then there was the additional step to say, well, what we really want ultimately by 2050 is 100% carbon-free power sector. And to do that, we'll have 50% renewables and 50% nuclear. So that was CRGA. And now moving on to CRGA, it's adding in battery storage, 3 gigawatts of battery storage, an additional 6 gigawatts of wind, almost 5 gigawatts of solar by 2035. So it's accelerating deployments in theory. And it also increases the budget for the renewable portfolio standard by inflation adjustment. So, lots of big ideas come in legislation, and that's great. And that is usually what gets the headlines. But then there's always the tinkering that goes on and the adjustments to things, because we've had an RPS since 2007, and now we're coming up on 20 years of RPS in Illinois. So we've gone in to dust it up a couple of times. Same thing with nuclear power, same thing with grid management. So this is just for your broader context, that the legislature intervenes when there are activities in the market that drive them, which is the case with CRGA, or there just needs to be issues fixed in legislation that have been passed in prior sessions. So let's get to the reason why this bill passed the way it did. Passed during veto session, and it's partly because of what's happening in PJM and MISO. And we're going to just focus on PJM. PJM is the regional grid that serves northern Illinois and parts of 12 other states. So you see here on the map, you've got ComEd all the way over on the west, and then all the other utility regions to the east. These are regions, they're utility companies that are all connected by high voltage transmission. So by connecting all these regions with high voltage transmission, essentially you're able to pool all of the generating capacity from all the power plants in all of these states and deliver that energy throughout this entire network, also called the grid. So for many years, for instance, nuclear power generated in northern Illinois and ComEd has moved very efficiently into southwestern Michigan, northeastern Iowa, I'm sorry, northeastern Indiana, and ports of Ohio to support their grid operations. So through this pooling process, we're not just stuck with local resources. We, in theory, are able to tap capacity resources to meet our demand from other neighboring states. It means that not every utility has to build up the maximum number of power plants. So that's the theory of wholesale markets. Okay. So what's happened in the PJM market that is driving this state legislation? Well, for the first time in my career, and I'm getting old, but for the first time in my career, demand for electricity in PJM and Northern Illinois is actually going up. What you have here are some graphs from the most recent load projections from PJM. And you see in the top, it shows the summer peak. So that's the maximum demand for electricity throughout that PJM region, measured in megawatts over on the left-hand axis. So you've got summer peak and winter peak. Those are the squiggly lines. And you can see that going back to, 2000, 2005, 2010, sometimes it went up, sometimes it went down, wasn't a real decided direction. But then all of a sudden comes the forecast for 2025, which is the blue line in each of those graphs, and it goes up. And then they refresh the forecast in 2026, and that's the green line, and it goes also up, even more up. And you can see that from a scalar standpoint, just in terms of overall growth, these are really material increases. Winter peak, for instance, is nearly doubling in the PJM region. So that's the peak demand for electricity during the winter months, which are typically October through March. And then summertime peak, we're all familiar with that. That's when all the air conditioners are running. So this is in PJM. Think about that grid, all those power plants connected to each other. And now all of a sudden the consumers are wanting a lot more electricity. At least they're projected to want a lot more electricity going into the future. And that's in the PJM region. And it's also true in the ComEd region. So here's the breakdown for ComEd. And again, same type of circumstance where summer peak and winter peak being pretty flat. I mean, they change from year to year, but that could be weather, could be some other things. There was no real upward direction occurring until 2025 and 2026. And this isn't as steep an incline as other portions of PJM, but it's still upward motion, and it represents new demand. Well, the challenge with new demand, and it's not that demand is a bad thing, and a lot of folks have said, well, this is data centers, and data centers use a lot of energy, and that's bad. Well, I don't know that it's good or bad. I just know that it is. They wouldn't be locating in these regions if they weren't wanted or needed. And these utilities have an obligation to serve. So now we're in a bit of a quandary, which is how do you, as PJM, get more power plants into that regional grid to meet this future demand? And this is where markets sometimes get a little misaligned, meaning that it's very difficult to build power plants. You have 5 to 7 years of studies to evaluate, can they connect to the transmission grid? Then they have to be financed, then they have to be built, then they have to operate. And it's a long-term asset that has to be brought online. So if demand is growing quickly and supply can't keep up, you get price increases. So this is the history of capacity prices, and capacity is the cost of meeting peak summer demand in PJM. And I know there's a lot of squiggly lines here. Just focus on the squiggly line that is pink, and that's for the RTO. That's the code for the portion of PJM that includes ComEd. And you see that the price goes up and down year over year over year. Go all the way over to the right-hand side, and you see that in 2024 and 2025, before these projected demand increases were starting to factor in, that capacity was at $28.92 a megawatt day. And that translates into about, for a typical single family home in ComEd, it's about $260, right? So $28.92 a megawatt day is equal to about $260 in 2024, 2025. Fast forward into 2026, 2027, when that rate goes up to about $329 per megawatt day. Well, that same house using the same amount of electricity is going to have a capacity charge of right around $2,962. So when your residents say our energy costs are going crazy high, it's not so much the energy, it's this capacity charge, which is the reservation to make sure that there's sufficient power plants to meet the summertime and wintertime demand. So okay, so you have a little market displacement. You've got growth happening quickly. Supply is slow to come online, and that causes prices to go up, which is a problem. It is a real problem. There's a deeper problem, though, and that gets to the reliability of the grid. So another process has gone in Illinois, and you may have heard of this, but there was under CRGA a requirement that the Illinois Power Agency, where I used to work, the Illinois Commerce Commission, and the Illinois EPA conduct what was called a resource adequacy study. And the resource adequacy study was to look at PJM and MISO, which are the wholesale markets that serve Illinois, and then the ComEd portion of Illinois, and then the downstate portion of Illinois, largely served by Ameren, Illinois, to determine, do we have enough capacity to meet actual demand, meaning beyond price, do we have a reliability problem? And that report was released in December. And in it were a number of graphs, but I pulled out the ones that I think are the most material. And what you're seeing here on the left is the projected generating capacity. Those are all the colored bars, each of the years going forward through 2035. And then the demand, which is the dashed line towards the top. And then in each of these, you have some red outlined pink boxes up at the top with numbers in them. And those numbers represent the amount of capacity that the market is short, meaning that there's not enough generating capacity to meet the demand represented by the dashed line. So in PJM, that starts in 2029 when they identify that PJM is a gigawatt short, and then it grows to 12 gigawatts, then 16, then 19, then 22, and on, based on this study. And then MISO, which serves central southern Illinois, is their deficit starts in 2031 at 8 gigawatts and then grows to 32 gigawatts over time. So those are the wholesale markets, and things are not looking great there. And they're also not looking great locally. So we had similar numbers for PJM, ComEd zone on the left, and then MISO LRZ is load zone 4, which is central southern Illinois. Now, you need to read this in a bit of a nuanced way. So similar to the last set of graphs, the colored bars indicate the types of resources, and you see the resource descriptors all the way over on the right. So you've got coal, you've got gas, you've got nuclear, wind, all those resources that they stack those up each year, and then they have this this dark blue towards the top, and the dark blue is called capacity transfer limit, and that indicates how much capacity can be brought into Northern Illinois or Ameren region of Illinois, the downstate region, from other states, right? So that's the import capacity limit. So when you look at this on a nominal basis, you say, oh, okay, well, this looks like for PJM, for instance, Yes, our amount of capacity drops as coal retires, as natural gas retires. And then we slowly get more resources of wind and solar. And maybe we've got a shortage starting in 2033, 2034, 2035. And that's true. That's one way to interpret this graph. But just remember that that capacity transfer limit is the indicator of how much capacity needs to come in from other states. And you remember from the prior slide that there's a lack of capacity in PJM generally starting in 2030. So if you look at 2030 on this graph and you realize that domestic resources in Northern Illinois aren't enough to meet demand, the dashed line, that we have to import capacity from other states within PJM, but we know that PJM doesn't have excess capacity at that at you know in the in that period. What I'm trying to express to you is that if there's a shortage in PJM starting in 2030 and ComEd is depending upon imports or starting in 2030 to meet its peak demand, that means that PJM in ComEd zone is not going to be able to meet its demand starting in 2030. That's the bad news. You have a similar situation in MISO, lower numbers, but same pattern, where essentially you can't count on MISO and PJM to make up your lost capacity or your missing capacity, which is kind of the point of having PJM and MISO. But set that aside, this growth rate coupled with a really slow deployment rate for new capacity is really going to cause a pinch. And that is going to continue to push prices to uncomfortable levels. And it also starts to threaten actual reliability, where you could have blackouts in these regions because there's not enough generation to meet demand. So that is kind of the context of why the legislators spent so much time during the veto session, because these trends have been known. I mean, they've been known to, even lay people like myself for years. I mean, it's not a mystery that this has been the trend. And now it's been identified by the state agencies, so it's now true. It's a part of the policy environment. And after the resource adequacy plan was issued, the legislature figured that they're going to need to take some action. So they did, and that was the basis of CRGA. Just quickly to close out the resource adequacy issue, now that the report is out, the Illinois Commerce Commission is leading a separate process called the mitigation plan, which is going to come up with short-term solutions to try to bridge the capacity gap that is going to occur or is projected to occur between now and 2030. And it involves trying to accelerate wind, solar, battery storage deployments in the state. It's also going to be looking at whether the planned retirements of the natural gas peaker plants should be delayed or rescheduled, just to make sure that there is sufficient capacity in northern and southern Illinois to continue to operate. So that's context, right? So there's in my experience in Springfield, there has to be an impetus to get things done. So that's the impetus for the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act. I'm breaking a lot of rules, personal rules here with too many words on a page, but Cheryl, I'll send you these slides, and if anyone wants them, they're obviously can have them for review. But I'm not going to read all these to you. I'm just going to hit the high points. Within CRGA, there's never just one thing, right? They had 1,000 pages to fill up. So there are a lot of concepts here, and I've tried to lay them out by category and then providing some of the details, and starting with the relatively simple aspects of the bill and then moving on to the more material and complex issues. So the first category is workforce and equity. Labor was at the table in the conversations, and they were able to convince legislators that project labor agreements were necessary for all solar projects, even the smaller community solar projects. So that got done. The Energy Transition Act was updated to provide more pre-apprenticeship programs for members of the environmental justice community. So hopefully those programs will continue to grow and start to find some job opportunities for folks within those communities. Moving beyond workforce is local authority and permitting. I don't know if this comes up too much with Mayor's Caucus members, but I know that a number of the counties in the state were pretty upset with these provisions of the bill. Essentially, the counties are responsible for a lot of zoning and rural areas permitting decisions. And apparently, a number of developers have experienced a lot of pushback at the county board level for project approvals. Well, now that pushback probably isn't going to occur because now there's expedited siting, which is where the Commerce Commission is going to be the authority that resolves siting disputes for wind, solar, and battery projects. And additionally, counties now have only 60 days to approve or deny energy storage permits. And if they don't reach a consensus, the permit is automatically approved. It limits the fees and environmental rules that local municipalities can impose on these projects as well. So this may be something, especially if you're in a community that is looking to have battery storage projects deployed, you as a municipal and permitting authority may want to take a look at this portion of the bill, or your corporation councils might want to, just to understand what constraints you're operating under. Your ability to say no has been adjusted. Might be the best way to put that.
Mark, Kevin Burns, this slide is of particular interest to municipalities, and I would argue that it has caused some tension between municipalities and county jurisdictions. No question about it.
Right. And I understand some of the issues, not all the issues. I think that there's probably a need to come up with some type of rationale for how to process applications as they come in, and to just be very, very clear about what the permitting and zoning requirements are moving forward. And then, of course, having a really select lawyer on your side never hurts either. Also, in general policy matters, the nuclear power reforms came about. So the moratorium on large-scale nuclear reactors has been lifted. And then fees paid by owners of nuclear resources to the Illinois Emergency Management Agency have been increased. I've had a number of people say, well, does this mean that we're going to get more new nuclear power plants? I don't think so. My experience in working with some of the folks at Argonne over the years is that only a utility that is guaranteed a rate of return from its Public Utility Commission is in a position to build these really large nuclear power plants. And we don't have that in Illinois. Our utilities don't own nuclear, or the investor-owned utilities don't own power generating resources. So, could Constellation try to build something? Yes, they could, but even they, I think, would have a difficult time financing that type of project. So I think maybe this is symbolic of the conversations in Springfield around how do we get ready for some type of deployment of small nuclear reactors. So this is just clearing out the prohibitions, and maybe in the next year or two, we'll see some more details in terms of how the state wants to handle the small nuclear reactors. There's some new programs and incentives that are out there. The Thermal Energy Networks is a pilot program to fund neighborhood scale geothermal district heating and cooling. Pretty interesting. There's Geothermal Homes program. Again, just starts in 2028, but it's to promote geothermal adoption. And then EV infrastructure is there. So the Illinois EPA continues to administer grants and financial assistance. And then they provided some greater clarifications in terms of how those funds are to be used for school buses, passenger vehicles, et cetera. So not a lot of new programs, but I did want to list these out because I know some municipalities are interested in this from a particularly on the thermal scale, as they have some policy imperatives surrounding trying to phase out natural gas. So now on to the heavy stuff. Grid modernization and reliability was really the thrust, I think, of the bill. The big sleeper issue there is the integrated resource plan. So going to zoom out a little bit. In most states, utilities own power plants, right? And they own transmission and they serve customers. And in most of those states, those utilities every 2 years or so must file an integrated resource plan. An integrated resource plan is really a gap analysis that says, we think we need this much power going forward. This is how much we have today. Here's the amount of delta or what's missing in that equation. And this is how we propose to build things that will help meet that future need. So Illinois has not had an integrated resource plan since the 1990s. My throwaway line is always that Illinois is apparently a faith-based organization, at least when it comes to energy. So we've been operating without a plan. Illinois, when it deregulated, essentially said, well, PJM and MISO will take care of it. We're finding out that they're not taking care of it, or they haven't for whatever reason. So now the state has decided that it's going to bring back the integrated resource plan. And instead of the utilities doing it, they are chartering the Illinois Commerce Commission to coordinate that activity. So two things here. One, the Commerce Commission is going to make a regular routinized assessment of resource needs. So it's going to basically repeat that resource adequacy plan on a 2-year basis, and then put together a long-term outlook to bridge the gap, if any, for a 5 to 20-year period. That's the forward view. And it will have the authority to increase charges, consumer charges, for the renewable portfolio standard, the energy efficiency portfolio standard, and the battery energy storage standard that are charged to consumers. And those funds are then used to buy more renewables, energy efficiency, and battery energy. So the bigger the gap, the more those rates need to go up. And the legislature does retain the right to reject proposed increases by the Illinois Commerce Commission. But this is a big step forward because we haven't had anyone in charge for about 30 some odd years. And now the Commerce Commission is going to be in charge, which is great. But we don't know exactly how this all works or how the timing works or if it's going to be effective. So we'll have to stay tuned. That's the big thing that I would bookmark it if it were me, looking at all this list of things. There's also virtual power plants, which is great. We're going to have the utilities. ComEd is by June 1 is supposed to propose a new rate at the Commerce Commission where it will provide compensation to distributed generation resources like solar, rooftop solar, and home batteries or business batteries, and provide a long-term contract that compensates those assets for dispatching during peak periods to provide grid reliability. So we'll see what ComEd comes out with that. And then there's there's Power Up Illinois, which has new standards and requirements for faster connection for EV infrastructure. So those are all grid related, and there's a lot going on here. and we'll see a little bit later some of these processes and where I think maybe the municipalities might want to at least monitor the developments as they move forward. And then the last slide is something I worked on in the veto session, which was the energy storage and battery procurement. I ran numbers that identified that the state needed about 15 gigawatts of battery storage to be able to meet its reliability needs by 2030, 2035. The legislature, in its wisdom, decided to authorize 3 gigawatts of procurements, and with that number being able to be increased in the future. So the Illinois Power Agency is going to make those procurements for those assets to be deployed by December 2030. The idea is that by getting those on deck quickly, that they'll be able to stabilize and reverse some of the capacity shortages that we saw for the resource adequacy plan. This is going to be funded through a new charge on consumers. So this is going to be a new charge that you see once these batteries come online. There's just going to be a charge. And I don't know how they're going to divvy those costs up. That's going to be a Commerce Commission issue. But again, might be another particular item for municipalities to consider, not only for your own operations, but also for the cost impact for your consumer, for your residents. Sorry. So that's a lot of stuff, right? What does it mean, and what do you do with it? So here's my shot at fancy art. Thank goodness for clip art, right? The implications are immediate cost increases, right? You as a municipality, for the bills that you pay, will see increases in your supply charges, your delivery charges, and then the programs. And I've tried to take a crack at a crystal ball, because most people are curious, well, how much, Mark, is this going to increase? My guess is that by 2030, supply costs in the state will go up another 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Delivery charges will go up another 3 cents, and then your program charges will go up 4 cents. So that's 9 cents a kilowatt hour. That's about a doubling of rates by 2030. That's my guess. That's not the legislators. That's not anyone else. That's just me running my numbers. That's what I would expect to see. So doubling of costs in the next 4 years is pretty significant. How do you deal with that? Well, I would start taking a look at my facilities real hard. I would do everything I could to reduce overall consumption, and I would also do what I could to reduce peak demand. These both go into your total cost of energy supply. I know that it's not easy to do efficiency. You can, of course, avail yourself of utility programs, both electric and natural gas. Those programs have been uplifted. There are new requirements, and the utilities are going to have to bring more value to the table. So that might be a funding source for you to look at. I think that some municipalities, especially those with larger facilities, might need to start stepping into the energy services contract arena, and just bite the bullet and start to deal with some of the heavy capital cost replacement projects. If they lack capital or they lack technical expertise, going outside to an energy services contract might be the way to go. If you have internal capacity and expertise, there's some very good municipal engineering departments out there, and they could manage these things, but they need a revenue stream. There's a process called intracting, which is essentially an accounting structure that allows dollars saved from energy efficiency upgrades to recirculate within the facilities departments for further investment in subsequent projects. So those are some structures that could be used, but efficiency is probably your number one response to these cost increases. I think you might also want to look at your procurement options. Of course, a lot of you do purchase from retail energy suppliers. I think that's great. I think, though, that at these cost levels, power purchase agreement or virtual power purchase agreement from a regional wind or solar project might start to make sense. In the past, a PPA for solar or wind or virtual power purchase agreement for solar or wind always came at a premium. I imagine that they might start coming into price parity with grid supply here in the next few years. And subject to your own bonding requirements or what's available in your operating budgets, you may be able to secure a good price hedge with some type of PPA or VPPA option. Takes a lot of work to do one of these, so it's not something that you turn around in a budget season. It's probably a 2-year process to get that type of a project put together. But I think you can do it, and maybe you should. It depends on your exposure. I think distributed generation makes a lot of sense. Still, the one important element of CRGA is that the cost caps on the renewable portfolio standard have largely been lifted, meaning that the cost cliff or the revenue cliff that was projected for 2028, 2029 is no longer there. So funding for rooftop solar paired with storage, standalone storage, those are all going to be available and will probably be accelerated as the Illinois Commerce Commission identifies how deep the capacity deficit is in Northern Illinois. And I think that municipalities might be really in a really good spot to be able to deploy those types of resources. And then because they are essentially revenue generating assets, right? They're generating power, so the power they're generating is roughly valued at what the wholesale market price is. So if wholesale market price for power is higher, then the value of those resources is higher. So you could do this through direct purchase or power purchase agreement, but it allows you to do load shifting, which is a significant cost advantage. You can sell ancillary services back to PJM. You could secure revenues from the virtual power plant rate. There's a lot of things you could do there. And then lastly, I would be aggressively searching for any type of credits or offsets through community solar or demand response. We're working now through the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. We've identified a partner that has community solar subscriptions that will be available to municipal facilities, not to your residents, which is how we've run the program in the past. These community solar program or project owners really want to work directly with municipalities, so we'll be rolling that out soon. But community solar is kind of a free option. You don't have to make an investment to get a discount on your bill. Is it going to balance your budget? No, but it is an incremental benefit that you can claim without having to make a major investment. And then demand response. If you can shed your load during peak demand periods, you can make a significant amount of money by working with an aggregator. And if you need to know a little bit more about that option or any of these others, just let me know. Happy to point you in the right direction. So that's what you can do for your facilities. What can you do from a program standpoint? And some of you have seen this graph before, and it just tries to express the different levels that a municipality operates in. So, you have certain things that you control, right? So those are your own facilities. So start with your own facilities, work through and optimize as best you can there. Then you can sponsor programs that are going to be a benefit to your residents. So that's anywhere from municipal aggregation to community solar for residents, commercial PACE, group buys, all those things, promoting the utility energy efficiency programs so that residents are aware that these opportunities exist. And then you have influence on building codes, energy benchmarking, and development agreements. And some of these aren't very sexy, but these are things that are really material at the local level and can really move the needle in terms of helping residents and businesses help control their costs. So one last thing, and I'll stop chattering at you, is I really think that right now there are a lot of proceedings that are occurring at the Commerce Commission and elsewhere, and I just listed a few of them, 5 of them here. I think that these proceedings would benefit from municipal participation. I don't know if you would materially benefit from it, but I think that these proceedings are largely populated by energy project developers, energy policy folks, some consumer groups, but no one is really in the room consistently speaking to the municipal viewpoint of, having a lot of direct contact with a lot of different sectors of the community, residential, small business, nonprofits, etc. And I just really think that the outputs of these processes, these proceedings, would be better if the municipal perspective was voiced somehow in the proceeding as part of the record. And I think that the commissioners would appreciate the municipal perspective because it would be pretty unique. They usually don't see a lot of municipal participation. So I think that it would be welcome. I don't know how that works. I'm not telling you what to do, but as you can see, there's a lot going on here. And if you have an interest that needs to be protected, just like I tell folks, should I be in Springfield? My answer always is, look, when it comes to Springfield, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. Same thing with these, right? If you're not in the room, nobody cares about you, that you don't exist, right? And your interests are not going to be taken into account. So I just encourage you to give it some thought. Is there a way to effectively and efficiently intervene in some of these proceedings and maybe share some of your concerns about how these policy decisions are being made? So thank you very much for your time and patience. And sorry if I went a little far afield, but I did want to provide you with the context that I think makes this a little bit more relevant. So thank you very much.
Mark, as always, thank you very much. We have a lot of questions, of course. I'm going to ask Cheryl and Tori and Juliet to help me identify which are the most pressing. But I do have one quick overarching question for you, Mark, and this is not meant to be awkward or political, but you reference, and I agree, that if municipalities are involved in the conversation and the policy discussion at the ICC, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Is it general understanding that the voices presented from the IMUA and IMEA just aren't as strong as individual municipalities?
I just think they're different. So
Okay.
IMUA and IMEA, I think, have a very focused perspective because they represent municipalities that have electric utilities, right? Or natural gas utilities. So they are market participants. That gives them a very unique aspect and perspective. Where I was talking about municipalities was more on the and they do a great job. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't being critical of them. I'm thinking more about the municipalities who are purely customers of the investor-owned utilities.
Okay.
And so they're kind of passive in that they don't have as many levers as an IMEA or an IMUA.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you. Cheryl, have you or Tori or Juliet, I'll defer to you in terms of categorizing.
Okay, yes.
Each question is important. So
yeah, we could start with some battery storage questions from Jason. He said, does the legislation speak to how municipalities have to define battery energy storage systems and where the use can be restricted? Are they more likely to be developed as a transmission asset by ComEd or more like solar developments? And this might impact how municipalities regulate the systems in their zoning ordinances. For example, a major utility use or as its own standalone definition and use.
Great questions. And that's why we need the participation, right? Because absent that type of input, you're going to have a bureaucrat at the Illinois Power Agency, a well-intended bureaucrat, but bureaucrat nonetheless, who's never developed a project or managed the zoning issue, making decisions pretty much uninformed decisions. So the way the process is going to work is that this summer will be 1,000 megawatts of utility scale battery storage will be procured. That's going to connect directly to PJM or MISO, and the local zoning ordinances. They're probably going to be mostly rural, is my hunch. And the IPA will come out with the specification. Bidders will bid, and they'll have to show evidence that they have a pathway forward to get permitting, and that'll be about it. The complexity comes in the next few years, where the IPA will decide how much utility scale storage to secure versus behind the meter storage, and then where, right? Are there going to be locational preferences, and then how they're going to be contracted? Is it going to be a 20-year deal, a timeline, or 15 years? So all of those elements are on the procurement side. They should be informed by what municipalities, especially for the distributed resource, should be informed by how the municipalities want to handle the zoning and permitting within their municipal limits. So at this point, we don't know. I don't know that the statute specifies what is to be done. It seems like they are punting this over and waiting for the developers and the municipalities to figure it out. And if there's a conflict, it goes to the Illinois Commerce Commission. And again, all credit to the commissioners and staff, but I don't know that any of them have ever built a project and understand the implications of zoning and ordinances and the like. So, it's going to be up to the municipalities to educate the regulators on this. And, that's another reason why I think engagement on these issues might be worthwhile.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks. And we've had some that were interested in the question of, does CRGA contain provisions for grant programs or other funding mechanisms available to procure and add these required battery, wind, and solar?
Yeah, the interesting thing, from my perspective, is that CRGA allows for the stacking of multiple incentives, particularly for batteries. So there's going to be a smart inverter rebate for batteries, very similar to rooftop solar, $250 a kW. There's going to be there is right now a solar paired with storage incentive that rebates back the cost of connecting the battery storage asset when it is paired with solar. So if you have solar, adding battery storage is going to be a great deal, because your cost to interconnect that is going to be rebated back to you. So your capital cost just went down. There's going to be an incentive on the battery itself, right? Then you can also participate in the virtual power plant program. So I think that all of these, or more market-based options like selling ancillary services to PJM, all of these things bode very well for being able to finance these projects. And especially, in my view, if the projects are sited at a municipal facility, that looks like a really safe bet from a project finance point of view. And maybe it's also something that meets into your energy security and safety. Maybe there's a role for the batteries to play on municipal facilities that might not currently have diesel backup generators, right? Or if there's questions as to whether or not diesel can be delivered in an emergency, maybe the batteries could be a part of a solution. So I think that the financing, the good part is we do have batteries that have been deployed. I have clients who have batteries at their factories right now. We know how they work in the ComEd rates. I have one client that has twice as much battery capacity as they have solar capacity, and they have a zero charge for their capacity charge from ComEd because they have so much battery storage, which has been great for them with capacity prices going the direction that they have. I'm not saying everybody has to do that, but it just gives you a sense that, okay, these resources have a lot of value in the market. How do we capture that and optimize them? And there's a lot of technology folks out there that can help you. They're brand agnostic when it comes to the batteries that they sell. they're more interested in selling the brains and how the battery operates and how it's optimized to secure financing. So there's maybe, if the municipal sector is really interested in this, maybe there's a joint procurement that can get to a short list of qualified firms that then the municipalities can speak to and just have some confidence that they've picked somebody who knows what they're talking about. Maybe that's something that municipalities can do themselves.
Thanks. And then we have another question. Will installing solar panels and battery storage reduce costs on customers?
Yes, it should, because you're in a position where every consumer always has the core decision, which is make versus buy. If I don't have solar and batteries, I'm just buying. And we know that prices are going up. So the question then is, can I make the electricity and capacity at a lower rate than what I can buy it? And the answer is probably. With these incentives, stacking them and then optimizing, you're again, are you going to balance the municipality's budget on this? Probably not. Can you get some cost stability for the next 15 to 20 years? Yes, you can.
Thanks. And then we have some questions about franchise agreements. Lisa says we were thinking about ending our franchise agreement with ComEd. However, this doesn't seem like the time not to have free electricity. Do you suspect ComEd will alter municipalities' franchise agreements?
I can't speak for the company. I just know that their preference is always to just kind of have a single approach as to everything as much as possible. Just makes their life easier. And, at scale, that makes total sense. I think that if you are going to do adjust your franchise agreements, you're just going to want to make your timing work. When you do a franchise agreement, you're taking in-kind payment from ComEd in the form of a bill credit that gets you down to a zero charge. That's option A. That's where most municipalities are. Option B is to take a cash payment, and your cash payment is based on your past 12 months of value of the in-kind compensation. So to me, it is more a question of timing than anything. I think that taking the franchise payment gives you the incentive to do energy efficiency work or rooftop solar. If you don't have a bill you're paying, you have zero incentive and zero benefit from putting solar panels and batteries and energy efficiency into City Hall, unless you're being altruistic. And I just haven't seen that occur. I mean, maybe it does. I don't see everything, but I haven't seen it very often. Having a profit incentive does tend to align and focus attention, but I think you want to run the numbers and see if it works. You're going to take a little bit of risk, but it's not a forever decision. I think you are limited in making a switch to every 2 years. So if it turns out to not be what you want, you can always go back.
Okay, thanks. And I think we've got some questions from Nick. If you wanted to unmute and ask some of your questions.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. So municipalities do economic development projects all the time, including in TIF districts. If we wanted to bring a battery storage developer to your town, does it make sense? I mean, first of all, would the Cook County assessor put it at a decent value that creates property tax increment? And then what would be the financial upside for the municipality?
The CRGA bill does apply a standard tax assessment calculation for the battery storage assets, very similar to how they've approached wind and solar resources. So that's all part of the bill. I guess I'll be a good consultant and say it depends in terms of whether it brings value. There can be it depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to get to a point where you're reducing if bringing in the battery storage somehow accelerates the development because now it's not demanding as much peak power from the ComEd distribution system, okay, maybe that's something that you can monetize and justify. If it's to ensure that there's grid resilience, if it's a fabricator and they have a continuous operation, and you want to demonstrate that, well, in our local area within this TIF district, we have battery storage that can provide backup. Okay, that might work as well. But we have to remember that most of these batteries, if they are not connected to the overall grid, so large scale, they're going to be small scale and behind the meter, and they're going to be a benefit to that meter, not necessarily to the neighbors around that meter. So I don't know if it's necessarily something that is going to benefit your development thesis outside of the fact that, okay, well, we've streamlined the battery provision process. We'll help you apply for these things, and we think it's a good thing to do. I'd have to think about it a little bit more in terms of understanding the drivers for the types of developments that you're working with. Sorry if that's weak sauce, but it's kind of a unique use application.
Thanks.
And then I know, Nick, you had another question. Did you want to ask that one about the 3 gigawatts? Or?
Yeah, just a quick refresher on what a gigawatt or 3 gigawatts being the target, what that means. And I forget if that's for a day or for a year, the unit of time that it corresponds to.
Yeah, so 3 gigawatts is 3,000 megawatts. And that's understood to be 4-hour duration batteries. So 3 gigawatts that can dispatch their full charge over a 4-hour period is the amount of megawatt hours then, or gigawatt hours that they're worth. So it's not a lot. I mean, 4 hours is a pretty short period of time. The statute contemplates that over time, longer duration batteries will come into the market. And that's why there's going to be a competitive bidding process for selection of projects through the Illinois Power Agency. The thinking is that, as longer duration batteries become more economically viable, that they'll start to take a larger share of the amounts of megawatts that are bid out through the Illinois Power Agency's procurement process.
Okay, thanks. And then Kim Stone, you had some questions. Did you want to ask those?
Sure. Thanks, Cheryl. The solar, that chart with MISO and PJM, solar is decreasing in one of them and not increasing at all in the other one. And with all of these requirements, how is that possible? Is it just increasing at such a slow rate?
What's actually happening, and this is it's going to sound convoluted, so if you need more background, I can send it to you. But when you connect, let's say you had a 100 megawatt solar farm in Northern Illinois and a 100 megawatt solar farm proposed for Southern Illinois, and then 100 megawatts of natural gas power plant. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that 100 megawatt is nameplate capacity, and that's great. But when you are counting those resources towards their ability to meet system peak demand, they need to be factored. And the factor is called an ELCC. That's the estimated load carrying characteristic of those technologies. So the ELCC of natural gas is about 80%. So 80% times 100 megawatts means that natural gas plant can contribute 80 megawatts towards system peak. The issue in PJM and MISO is that the ELCCs for solar are down in the 20% or 10% range. So same 100 megawatts of maximum output, but they're only being credited with 10 megawatts and 20 megawatts based on their ELCCs, which simply means that they can't be turned on when system peak occurs. They generate as the solar resources available. So what's happening in those graphs is that as the ELCCs continue to drop in MISO and PJM, even if you put a lot more solar into those markets, they're going to be worth less and less because the ELCCs are moving down towards single digits.
So does that ELCC change in summer or winter? Because in summer, solar should be worth a lot more because it's producing more at peak times. In winter, it's probably the opposite.
In MISO, they have seasonal ELCCs. That's correct. PJM has a once a year ELCC. And I understand what you're saying about summer peak, but in reality, from both of those markets, both PJM and MISO, they're observing that system peak is occurring later in the day. So instead of it being at 2 p.m. in the afternoon at the height of solar generation, it's actually a bit later in the day, around 5, 6, 7 o'clock, when solar is not generating at its maximum.
Thanks. And then the other question that Cheryl responded to, but I just want to comment on is I really appreciate you encouraging municipalities to participate in these various hearings. It's so important. I was one of the few elected officials who testified at the IECC hearings regarding the energy codes and the stretch codes. And it would be really helpful to have some talking points for municipalities. I got some information from Edith and Cheryl, but was able to put a lot of it together myself. But I think for others to have some information that they could use, or perhaps even a training session, that would go a long way to getting people to participate in those hearings.
I endorse your proposal. I think that is a great example of what can be done. And yeah, it's not always easy. I get that, but I think it brings a lot of value. So, hopefully the output is worth the input.
And if nothing else, Kim, it's a dare I say joy to watch how the sausage is sometimes made at those hearings, because they are complex,
Yep.
they are long, they are interesting, but yeah.
No, it's definitely interesting and helps
Yeah.
provide some information as to how to proceed.
Exactly.
What's helpful.
Well, as an example, tomorrow afternoon, I believe the Illinois Commerce Commission is hosting the first in-person meeting of parties to respond to this mitigation plan that's in response to the resource adequacy gap. And it's going to be like the cantina scene from Star Wars. I mean, it's just it's
For the
everybody.
record, that's Mark Pruitt, ladies and gentlemen, who I was waiting for the analogy. That was beautiful.
One of them.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, Kim.
Sure.
While I'm here, energy efficiency is not incorporated anywhere in those charts of capacity. Channeling Amory Lovins, is there any way to, if there's energy efficiency programs, can't we just reduce that peak in some way?
Energy efficiency used to be included as a capacity resource in both PJM and MISO. They are no longer included in the as capacity resources. Demand response is, because it's dispatchable and can be metered. You can actually identify how much load demand is taken off the grid. But for energy efficiency, they were removed, I think 2 years ago. So even though they're good, they're not recognized as benefiting the reliability structure of those two grids. And we can disagree with them. We're free to disagree, but that's where they are right now. They're not providing any credit for those types of resources.
Okay, thanks. And then Lucy, you had a question if you wanted to ask that, if that hasn't been answered yet.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I was just asking, there's kind of been a lot of, maybe it's internal or external, talk about how this bill will impact municipalities' local zoning codes. And so I was just wondering, do you think the sort of primary concern is just that permitting aspect within the counties, or do you think there's other provisions that municipalities?
I think it's largely permitting. Yeah, I could be wrong on this, but my sense is that a lot of the concerns I'm hearing raised now are very similar to the concerns that we heard a number of years ago around rooftop solar and EV charging stations. So, and I might be wrong on this, but I think a lot of that got cleared out with permitting, clarifications, and processes. And I imagine this is going to be the same type of thing. I think zoning really only comes into it if a developer wanted to have some, say, just a large battery, and they wanted to park it next to a substation, and it wasn't, behind or serving any individual customer. They'd say, well, we've got this great big shipping container parked in our community. What do we do with that, right? So that might rise up to the zonings. In most municipalities, issues that are most relevant.
Okay, thanks. And I think
Cheryl, I'm going to jump in if I may. Mark, could you clarify one thing? And I hope I heard you correctly. When we talked about zoning and the natural yin and yang between county permitting and zoning and municipal permitting and zoning, I believe you referenced a statement that if not within 60 days, a county determines the appropriateness, it is in essence approved, therefore.
Yes.
So what I hear is, and perhaps this is relevant to the other questions, and forgive me, this sounds a little bit nefarious, but if a county wants something developed, they can simply choose not to act on it and it'll be developed.
Also, yes.
Okay. So that's a
but I think that the developer community will probably notice that. And there's already a trailer bill in Springfield now. So yeah, it's true. I don't know how long it's going to be true. There might be a short shelf life on that one.
Got it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Trustee Lawrence has a question if you wanted to ask that. And if not, I can, she's asking about how to ameliorate data center impacts on energy and capacity in the immediate future.
That's a question to answer in 10 seconds, Mark. Let's see if you can do that.
More. You need more generation. And, the good news is that the system will not allow more data centers to connect to the grid than can be supported. So at some point, ComEd is going to tell them no, or not no, but we can't serve you until 2032, in which case the developer then leaves, which sounds like an easy solution, but that's a lot of lost economic development. I mean, each of those buildings is between $6 and $12 million per megawatt just to construct the building, and maybe double that for the guts of the building. So, you're giving up something. So you just need to understand both sides of the equation.
And in spirit of using that word amelioration, is that ameliorated by data center developers saying, don't worry about it, municipality or county or even PJM or MISO, we're going to build our own substation to fuel this baby.
It's going to be their own. It's going to need to be their own substation, right? So that they're not pushing hardware costs onto other consumers. They're also going to need to come with their own power plant so that they're not driving up the capacity costs. So that's where bring your own generation is kind of a theme song that's out there now. Or they just decide to go elsewhere. So Ed Sidar at ComEd sent me an email last month where he indicated that 1.5 gigawatts of new data centers out of 7 gigawatts had backed out of the interconnection queue because of costs and timing. So
interesting. Okay.
Markets respond, but not always in a timely fashion.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks. And then Tim, you had 2 questions if you wanted to ask any that have not been answered already.
Yeah. How you doing, Mark? So
Hey,
my question was, how does the new programs tie into the EV world. So the vehicle to grid and energy storage and solar, that whole ecosystem. How does that fit in the EV side of things, the charging and the two-way?
I don't see a lot of action there, Tim. Most of what I see in the bill that relates to EVs are clarifications in the funding directives that have been given to the granting agencies. I haven't seen anything in there that indicates to me that grid to vehicle or vehicle to grid energy storage is being contemplated or prioritized as a program.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, I see that as tying into kind of a demand response type of an action that, maybe it can fall under there.
Yeah.
The second thing is just to follow on the franchise agreement. You were saying that municipalities it would be a good thing to investigate solar on municipal buildings. How does that fit in with the franchise agreement? Is that more or less what you had explained is how they structure that agreement, or would they be smart to go a different direction so that they could benefit from energy efficiency and solar in a building?
Right. All I was saying is that if you have a municipal facility that is essentially has a zero bill, right? Investing in solar panels or in new lighting or anything in that building is not going to reduce cost to the municipality. So it's going to be a pure cost adder to put those solar panels on, or a pure cost adder to change those light bulbs when you're under a franchise agreement. If you convert to, I believe it's the infrastructure fee, where you're paid, you as a municipality receive a check for your compensation for allowing ComEd to operate their system within your municipal borders. Well, now you have a revenue stream and you want to optimize that. So that's why you would make those investments.
Okay, so that would be a good thing to consider, is if you're on the former, to change to the latter, or investigate it as a minimum.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, and then Erin had a question if you wanted to ask yours.
Sure, I can do that. Hi, Mark. I guess I wanted to ask, stop my video because I realized I'm looking at the wrong place. Is there like any good, simple public messaging you've seen about this and how CRGA will impact ratepayers? I think, obviously the concern is you're talking about like a 9 cent, I wrote $9, sorry, 9 cent kilowatt hour increase, but then not having energy what we need and the storage, there's two different risks, but I feel like, I don't know that on the public side, we're sort of explaining to people why this is so important and, how they can be involved. And I was just wondering if you've seen anything along those lines, that is sort of like clear public messaging.
Public messaging on this is tough because there's math, right? And that's just, I know that sounds snarky, but it's just the reality. So here's my scar tissue on this. I ran the analysis that said, if you don't in batteries, this will be your cost. If you do put in batteries, this will be your cost. And I'm happy to share that with you. It's a public document.
That'd be great.
And you're right. If you invest in bringing more capacity online, you're going to have lower capacity costs because it's set by the relative balance of supply and demand. The issue is that your costs tend to front load for some number of years before you get to a volume in the market where you start to suppress the prices. But happy to share that with you. It's an analysis, and if you want to go through someone else's spreadsheets, you're more than welcome, or you can read the report. It's there, and maybe there's some extracts there. But the reality is that Illinois hasn't been investing in new power plants like Indiana and Iowa and other states over the past 30 years. We were trust fund babies. We had all this excess generation, and the coal assets are bled out, the natural gas assets are being bled out, the oil assets are being bled out. All that's being left is the nukes. And was it Hemingway say, how'd you go broke? Well, slowly and then suddenly, right? We went from having the surplus to not a surplus, and that's where we're at right now. So we're going to have to spend some money to get back up to surplus.
that analysis would be helpful. Thanks. I just think I think at my agency too, we're also sort of struggling to explain like, the rate load, how it's impacting ratepayers, and sort of like why these investments are important. But it's a struggle. I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Well, I think anytime we can have Hemingway quoted in an energy and environment, it's a perfect day.
I'm here to help.
Are there any other questions? Understanding that all of us have time that is precious. Our next Energy and Environment Committee meeting is on the 17th of March, St. Patty's Day. And we're talking about engaging residents in sustainability and the important work thereof. Any last minute questions for our friend and distinguished guest, Mr. Pruitt? Yes, Nicholas.
One, what is one thing a municipality should do in the next 6 months? Just one thing.
I think look up Hemingway. I think that's probably Mark, what's your answer?
I would do a full review of energy sources and uses for municipal operations, and then use that to identify where there are suitable investment opportunities for that range of options that I put forward. I would first attack what you can control before worrying about other things downstream. I would try to get the ship in order, because it's going to be a tough couple of years.
And thank you to our friends in Oak Park who referenced that Hemingway was born there, as was I, but thank you for not mentioning that. So if there's no other questions, we have given you back, ladies and gentlemen, 6 minutes of your day. Spend it wisely. Thank you all for being with us. Mr. Pruitt, thank you. You're the best.
Thank you
Enjoy
all.
your day, everybody. Enjoy your day. Be safe, be good, and we'll see you soon.